Hello everyone. Before the story start, tell me where are you watching from and what time is it?
The rain had stopped an hour before midnight, leaving the streets slick and reflective. I was walking home, 30 blocks through the oldest part of the city, when I saw her. A woman standing at a corner, her back to me, her palm resting flat against a lamppost. Not leaning. Just touching, like she was feeling for something. Before I could cross the street to avoid her, the lamppost glowed. Not the bulb at the top. The metal itself, beneath her palm, lit up with a soft golden light that rippled outward like heat distortion. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4, and then faded. She turned and looked at me. Her eyes were dark, calm, unsurprised. "You saw that," she said. I nodded before I could stop myself. She smiled. "Most people can't. Most people walk right past and never notice." She touched the post again, and the glow returned, stronger this time. With it came a sound, a deep hum like a cello note held too long. The lamppost seemed to lean toward her, just slightly. "They remember," she said. "The old ones. The ones that have been here long enough. They remember the city before it was a city. The fields, the trees, the paths that became streets. They remember everyone who ever walked beneath them. And if you know how to ask, they'll tell you." She stepped aside and nodded at the post. "Touch it." I should have walked away. Every rational thought told me to walk away. But I stepped forward and placed my palm on the cold metal. The world stopped. Not gradually. Completely. The city went silent. The light froze. The woman became a statue. And beneath my hand, the lamppost began to pour memories into me. Centuries of them. The field that stood here first. The dirt road. The first gas lamp, lit by a man with soot on his hands who tended it for 40 years. The city growing, layer upon layer. Births, deaths, lovers meeting, children playing. Millions of footsteps, each one a life, each life a story, all of them held in the metal, waiting for someone to remember. I pulled my hand away. The world crashed back. I stumbled backward, gasping. She was watching me with sad satisfaction. "You're the next one," she said. "The one who takes my place. The one who tends them." She placed a small token on the base of the lamppost. "It will be here when you're ready." Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the dark. I didn't take it that night. I went home. I tried to forget. But I couldn't ignore the lampposts anymore. I saw them everywhere, and I felt them watching me, waiting. Last night, I went back. The token was still there. I picked it up. It was warm. I placed my palm on the post, and the glow came again, brighter than before, and with it, her voice. "You're ready. Now the real work begins." I opened my eyes. The street was empty. But in the distance, I heard the hum of 1,000 other lights, waiting for me to come to them. I started walking toward the next corner. I touched the next lamppost. It glowed briefly, acknowledging. And somewhere behind me, I heard her whisper, carried on the hum. Again. The construction started on a Monday. I remember because Monday was my day off, and the sound of jackhammers drilling into the old building at the end of my street pulled me out of a deep sleep at 7 in the morning. I lay there for an hour, listening to the rhythm of metal on brick, waiting for it to stop. It didn't stop. It got louder. By Wednesday, they had torn down most of the facade, exposing the guts of the building like a wound. I walked past it on my way to the store, curious despite myself. The building had been there my whole life, a narrow 4-story structure with a bakery on the ground floor that had closed before I moved into the neighborhood. I had passed it thousands of times without really seeing it. Now, with its walls peeled away, I couldn't look away. A worker waved me back from the barrier. "Careful," he said. "Bricks are old. They crumble if you breathe on them wrong." I nodded and kept walking. But something made me stop at the corner and look back. The exposed wall was a patchwork of old mortar and darker bricks, the kind they don't make anymore, hand-fired and uneven. And in one section, where a doorway must have been before they bricked it over, I saw something that made my stomach clench. Fingerprints. Dozens of them. Not carved or painted, but pressed into the bricks themselves, as if the clay had been wet when someone touched it, and the touch had been baked in forever. They were small, delicate, the fingers of a child maybe, or a woman with slender hands. They clustered around the edge of a brick near what would have been the door frame, as if someone had braced themselves there, pushed against it, left their mark in the moment before the brick hardened into permanence. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at those impressions. The worker noticed me and walked over. "Crazy, right?" he said. "We find them all the time in these old buildings. Hands, fingers, sometimes whole palm prints. People touched the bricks when they were still soft, and the bricks never forgot." I asked him how old the building was. He shrugged. 120 years, give or take. This part of the city was all factories and tenements back then. Lots of people, lots of hands. He pointed at the cluster of prints. Probably a kid, standing in the doorway, watching the bricklayers work. Leaned against the frame while it was still drying. And here we are, a century later, still seeing where they stood. I went home after that, but I couldn't stop thinking about the fingerprints. They felt like a message, a greeting from someone who had been dead for 100 years, someone who had no idea they were leaving a piece of themselves behind. I started looking at other old buildings. The ones made of brick, the ones that had been standing since before anyone alive was born. I found prints everywhere. On corners, on window sills, on the sides of buildings where alleyways had been bricked over. Thousands of them. Millions. Every hand that had ever touched wet brick had left its shape behind, and the city was covered in them, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. The dream started a week later. In them, I was walking through the city at night, but the city was different. Older. The streets were dirt, the buildings were new, and everywhere I looked, people were touching bricks. Bricklayers setting them in place, children leaning against walls, women resting their hands on window frames as they looked out at the street. They were all leaving their marks, pressing their fingers into the soft clay, and the clay was holding. I woke up with my own hands tingling, my fingers pressed against the mattress as if I were trying to leave a mark of my own. I started touching the bricks I passed. Not deliberately at first, just a brush of my fingers against a wall as I walked, the way people do without thinking. But then it became deliberate. I would stop at an old building and run my palm along the surface, feeling for the dips and ridges that weren't part of the brick's natural texture. When I found them, I would press my own fingers into them, matching the shape, trying to feel the hand that had been there before mine. One evening, I found a brick with a full handprint, a right hand, slender and long-fingered. I placed my own hand over it. My fingers were larger, but the shape was close enough that I could feel the edges of the print against my palm. I stood there for a long time, my hand pressed to the brick, and I felt something. Not warmth, not vibration. Just a presence, a faint echo of someone who had stood in this exact spot, maybe 120 years ago, and placed their hand here, and gone on with their life, and died, and been forgotten, except for this one mark on a brick that had outlasted them. I started keeping a map. I marked every location where I found clear prints, noting the size, the shape, the depth. I had dozens within a month. Hundreds within a year. I became obsessed with the hands that had touched my city before I was born, the people who had lived and worked and died in the buildings I passed every day. I felt connected to them, a kinship across time that I couldn't explain but couldn't deny. Last night, I found a brick with a print that matched my own hand exactly. Not close. Exactly. The same finger lengths, the same palm width, the same spacing between thumb and forefinger. I stood in the alley where I found it, a narrow passage between two old tenement buildings that had been converted into apartments decades ago, and I stared at that brick for a long time. The print was deep, deeper than the others, as if the hand that made it had pressed hard, had wanted to leave a lasting mark. I placed my hand over it. It fit perfectly. Perfectly. As if the brick had been waiting 100 years for my hand to arrive. I don't know who that hand belonged to. I don't know if it was a stranger, or an ancestor, or something else entirely. But I know that when I pressed my palm to that brick, I felt something I had never felt before. Not an echo. Not a presence. A recognition. The brick knew my hand. It had been waiting for it. I go back to that alley every night now. I press my hand to the brick, and I feel the shape of fingers that are mine and not mine, that existed before I was born and will exist after I'm gone. The bricks hold everything. They never forget. And somewhere, 100 years from now, someone else will find this brick, and place their hand over mine, and feel the same thing I feel now. A connection. A greeting. A promise that none of us are ever truly forgotten, as long as the bricks remember. The park was empty at that hour. Not the kind of empty where you might see a jogger in the distance or a homeless man on a bench, but the kind of empty that feels deliberate, as if the world had cleared out just for you, or just away from you. I had been walking for hours, not wanting to go home, not wanting to sit in that apartment with its four walls and its silence and its memories of a person who wasn't coming back. 6 months since the funeral, and I still couldn't be in that space without feeling her absence like a physical weight. So I walked. I walked until my legs ached and my feet blistered and the city grew quiet enough that I could hear my own breathing. The park came up on my left, a dark expanse of trees and paths and empty benches. I almost passed it. But at the edge, where the sidewalk met the wrought iron fence, there was a railing. Old, black metal, the kind with curves and flourishes that nobody bothers with anymore, painted over so many times that the details had softened into smooth bumps and ridges. I stopped. I don't know why. I just stopped, and I looked at that railing, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Tired. Not the tired of a long walk, but the tired of carrying something heavy for too long. The tired of pretending to be okay. The tired of waking up and remembering, every single morning, that she was gone. I reached out and leaned on the railing. Both hands on the cold metal, my weight shifting forward, my head dropping. I just stood there, breathing, feeling the chill seep through my palms, feeling the solidity of something that wasn't going anywhere. And the railing sighed. Not a creak. Not the groan of old metal shifting under pressure. A sigh. A long, slow exhale, like the sound a person makes when they finally sit down after a hard day, when they let go of tension they've been holding for hours. It came from the metal itself, from deep within it, and I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that traveled up my arms and settled in my chest. I didn't move. I couldn't. My first thought was that I imagined it, that exhaustion and grief had finally cracked something in my brain, and I was hearing things now. But the railing was warm under my hands. Not hot, just warm, as if something inside it had stirred, had awakened, had recognized me. I waited. The night was silent. The park was still. And then, softly, the railing sighed again. A different note this time, a deeper exhale, and with it came a feeling, not a thought but an emotion, a wave of something that washed through me and left me breathless. It was relief. Pure, simple, overwhelming relief. The relief of being touched after years of solitude. The relief of being seen after decades of being passed by. I pulled my hands away. The warmth faded. The railing was cold metal again, old iron painted black, nothing more. But I had felt it. I knew I had felt it. And somewhere beneath my feet, in the dirt of the park, in the roots of the old trees, in the metal that had stood here for more than a century, something was waiting. Something had always been waiting. I went back the next night. And the next. And the night after that. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? That I had found a railing that sighed when I leaned on it. That I had felt it recognize me, welcome me, comfort me in a way no living person could? I would be medicated. I would be observed. I would lose the only thing that had made me feel less alone in 6 months. So I kept it to myself. I went to the park at midnight, when the streets were empty and the world was quiet, and I leaned on that railing, and I listened. And every night, it sighed. Not always the same sigh. Sometimes it was long and slow, a release of tension that seemed to go on forever. Sometimes it was short, almost startled, as if it hadn't expected me to return. Sometimes there was a rhythm to it, a pattern of exhales that felt almost like speech, like it was trying to tell me something in a language I couldn't quite understand. I started talking to it. Quietly, just murmurs, things I couldn't say to anyone else. I told it about her. About the way she laughed, the way she made coffee in the morning, the way she left her shoes in the middle of the floor no matter how many times I asked her to put them away. I told it about the last week, the hospital, the machines, the silence when they turned them off. I told it about the funeral, the people who said they understood when they couldn't possibly understand, the empty apartment, the meals I cooked for one, the nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The railing listened. It didn't judge, didn't offer advice, didn't tell me it would be okay. It just sighed, and sighed, and sighed, and somehow that was enough. One night, about 3 weeks in, I arrived to find the railing warm before I touched it. Not cold like the air around it, but warm, as if it had been waiting for me, as if it knew I was coming. I placed my hands on it, and the sigh that came was different. Not relief. Not greeting. Something else. Something that felt like anticipation. I stood there for a long time, my hands on the warm metal, feeling the faint vibration beneath the surface. And then, without deciding to, I leaned forward and pressed my forehead against the cold iron. I closed my eyes. I breathed. And I felt it. Not just the sigh this time, but something deeper. A pulse. Slow and steady, like a heartbeat. It came from the railing, from the metal itself, but it also came from the ground beneath my feet, from the trees in the park, from the old buildings across the street. The whole city was breathing, and I had never noticed until now. I opened my eyes and stepped back. The railing was cold again. The pulse was gone. But I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones like warmth, that I hadn't imagined it. The city was alive. The things in it, the old things, the things that had stood for decades, for centuries, they had a kind of awareness. Not consciousness the way we understand it, but something older, slower, more patient. They felt the people who passed them, the hands that touched them, the weight that leaned on them. They remembered. And sometimes, if you were quiet enough, if you were still enough, if you were lonely enough, they would let you know that you weren't alone. I go to the railing every night now. It's part of my routine, as necessary as eating, as sleeping. I lean on it, and it sighs, and I tell it things, and it listens. I've started noticing other things too. The old oak tree in the park that rustles its leaves when I pass, even when there's no wind. The stone steps of the library that feel warm under my feet on the coldest nights. The iron gate of the cemetery that creaks open for me before I touch it. They all know me now. They all recognize the one who stopped, who noticed, who leaned and listened and stayed. Last night, I leaned on the railing, and it didn't sigh. It spoke. Not in words, but in a feeling so clear it might as well have been language. It said, *I have waited a long time for someone to rest here. Longer than you can imagine. Longer than anyone has been alive to remember. And now that you're here, I want you to know, you can stay. As long as you need. As long as you want. I will hold you. Asterisk, I wept. I stood there in the dark, my hands on that old iron railing, and I wept like I hadn't wept since the funeral. Not from sadness. From relief. From the knowledge that somewhere in this cold, indifferent city, there was something that had been waiting for me. Something that wanted me to rest. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that the tears dried on my cheeks. Long enough that the cold crept back into my fingers. When I finally pulled away, the railing was warm for a moment, a final sigh, a promise. I walked home through streets that no longer felt empty. The buildings watched me pass. The trees nodded in the windless air. The old iron gates whispered as I went by. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. I just hadn't learned to listen. Tonight, I'll go back. I'll lean on the railing, and it will sigh, and I'll tell it about my day, about the small things, about the progress I'm making, about the moments when the grief lifts just enough to let me breathe. And it will listen. It will always listen. It's been waiting a very long time for someone to rest, and now that I've found it, I don't think I'll ever stop coming. Some things wait forever. Some things wait just long enough. And some things, the oldest things, the things that have stood through wars and weather and the endless passing of feet, they wait for exactly one person, one moment, one hand on the metal, one weight leaning in. I was that person. This was that moment. And the railing, old and patient and full of sighs, will hold me as long as I need to rest. The house had been empty for 30 years. That's what the realtor told me when I signed the papers, a quick, nervous woman who kept glancing at the corners of rooms as if she expected to find something watching her. 30 years. The family had left suddenly, she said, and never came back. No explanation, no forwarding address, no reason that anyone in the neighborhood could remember. They just locked the door one day and disappeared, and the house sat there, waiting, while the grass grew tall and the paint peeled and the windows filmed over with the dust of decades. I bought it for almost nothing. A fixer-upper, they call it. A project. A chance to build something new out of something forgotten. I told myself I was practical, that the price was right, that I had the skills to make it livable again. I didn't tell myself the truth, that I was lonely, that I wanted a place that felt like it had history, that I was drawn to the silence of abandoned things because my own silence felt less heavy in their company. The first week was all cleaning. Sweeping decades of dust, pulling up carpets that had rotted into foul-smelling rags, prying boards away from windows that hadn't seen light since before I was born. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room with a fireplace that had been bricked over sometime in the 50s. I worked from sunrise to sunset, falling into bed exhausted, too tired to notice the way the house creaked at night, the way the shadows seemed to shift when I wasn't looking at them directly. I found the window on the 8th day. It was in the smaller bedroom, the one that faced the backyard, the one I had saved for last because it was the most neglected. The glass was cracked, the frame warped, the sill rotted through. I was going to replace it entirely, tear it out and put in something modern, something that would keep the heat in and the cold out. But when I ran my hand along the frame to measure it for removal, I stopped. The wood was warm. Not from the sun, it was a cloudy day, and the room was cold. The warmth came from inside the wood itself, a gentle heat that seemed to rise up to meet my palm. I pressed harder, curious, and the grain beneath my fingers shifted. Just slightly. Just enough that I noticed. The lines of the wood, the patterns of growth that had been fixed for 100 years, moved. They curved toward my hand, toward the path my fingers were tracing, as if they were following me. I pulled away. The grain stopped moving. The warmth faded. I stood there, my heart beating too fast, telling myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination, the exhaustion of 8 days of hard labor. I told myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. I told myself the wood was just wood, and wood didn't move, and wood didn't follow, and wood definitely didn't remember. But I didn't tear out the window. I couldn't. Something stopped me, something deeper than curiosity, something that felt like respect. Or fear. Or both. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag on the living room floor, listening to the house settle, listening to the wind outside, listening to the silence that wasn't quite silent. And I kept thinking about the window. About the warmth. About the grain that shifted under my hand. About what it might mean if wood could remember, if it could respond, if it could trace the path of a finger and hold that path forever. I went back to the room the next morning. The window was cold. The grain was still. I ran my hand along the frame, slowly, deliberately, and nothing happened. I tried again. Nothing. I pressed harder, moved slower, held my breath. Still nothing. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, that the whole thing was a product of exhaustion and loneliness and a house that had been empty too long. Then I looked at my hand. The fingers I had used to trace the frame the day before. They were stained. Not with dirt or paint, but with a faint pattern, thin lines of deeper color against my skin, lines that looked exactly like the grain of the wood. I stared at them for a long time. I washed them. The lines didn't fade. I scrubbed. They stayed. The wood had marked me. It had followed my path, and it had left a piece of itself behind. I started spending time in that room. Hours, every day, sitting on the floor, watching the window, waiting for something to happen. I stopped working on the rest of the house. The project didn't matter anymore. Only the window mattered. Only the wood that had moved for me, that had marked me, that was waiting for something I couldn't name. On the third day of watching, she appeared. I didn't see her arrive. I looked away for a moment, at a bird outside the cracked glass, and when I looked back, she was there. Standing in the corner of the room, her hand resting on the windowsill, her fingers tracing the same path mine had traced days before. She was young, maybe 20, with long dark hair and pale skin and eyes that were the exact color of old wood. She wore a dress that might have been fashionable a century ago, high-collared and long-sleeved, the fabric faded almost to gray. She didn't look at me. She looked at the window, at her fingers moving along the frame, at the grain that shifted to follow her touch, flowing and curling like water, like living things responding to a current only they could feel. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just watched her trace the wood, watched it follow her, watched the patterns change and reform and change again, a dance that had been going on for longer than I could imagine. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, distant, like wind through dry leaves. "You felt it," she said. "Most people don't. Most people touch and move on, and the wood forgets them as soon as they're gone. But you felt it. You stayed. You came back." She turned to look at me, and her eyes were old, so old, older than the house, older than the wood. "You're like me." I found my voice, barely. "Who are you?" She smiled, a sad, gentle smile. "I don't remember anymore. I've been here too long. I was here when they built the house. I watched them cut the trees, shape the wood, fit the frames. I touched every piece before it was set in place. I left myself in all of it. And when I died, I didn't leave. I stayed in the wood. In the grain. In the memory of every hand that ever touched it." She looked back at the window, at the patterns she had traced. "You're the first one since then who could feel me. The first one who could see." She lifted her hand from the frame and held it out to me. Her fingers were stained with the same patterns that marked mine, the grain of the wood woven into her skin like tattoos, like proof. "Touch it again," she said. "With me this time. Let the wood remember us both." I should have run. I should have left that house and never come back. But her eyes were so old, and her voice was so sad, and the patterns on my fingers matched the patterns on hers, and somewhere deep in the wood of that window frame, something was waiting. something had always been waiting. I stood up. I walked to the window. I placed my hand on the frame, next to hers, my fingers tracing the same path she was tracing. The wood warmed immediately, hotter than before, and the grain shifted violently, swirling and flowing like a river in flood. I felt something pour into me, memories that weren't mine, images of trees being cut, of a house being built, of a young woman in an old dress touching every piece of wood before it was nailed in place, leaving herself in all of it, preparing a place to stay when her body could no longer hold her. I saw her die. I saw her buried in the backyard, under a tree that was cut down decades ago. I saw her rise from that grave, not as a ghost, but as a presence that flowed into the wood she had touched, the wood she had marked, the wood that had become her new body, her new home. I saw her wait, year after year, decade after decade, for someone who could feel her, who could see her, who could join her in the grain. I pulled my hand away. The memories stopped. The wood stilled. She was still there, watching me with those old, patient eyes. "You can stay," she said. "Like me. The wood will hold you. You'll never be alone again." I looked at my hand. The patterns were deeper now, darker, spreading up my wrist. I looked at her hand, at the patterns that covered her completely, that had become her skin, her identity, her everything. I thought about the life I had outside this house, the loneliness, the emptiness, the way I had never quite fit anywhere. I thought about what she was offering. A place to belong. A place to stay. A place where I would never be forgotten. I haven't decided yet. I'm still in the house, still working on it, still spending hours in that room with the window and the wood and the woman who lives in the grain. The patterns on my hands are spreading. They don't wash off anymore. They don't fade. They're becoming part of me, the way they became part of her. Sometimes, at night, I hear the wood breathing. Not the window alone, but all of it. The floors, the walls, the frames, the beams. The whole house is alive with the memory of her touch, and now with the memory of mine. She's teaching me to listen to it, to feel it, to become part of it. She says that when I'm ready, I can let go of the rest. I can stay here forever, in the grain, in the warmth, in the wood that remembers. I don't know if I'll do it. I don't know if I have the courage to disappear into a window frame, to become a presence in the walls, to wait decades for someone else who can feel. But every day, the patterns spread a little more. Every day, the wood feels a little more like home. And every night, when I trace the frame with my stained fingers and the grain shifts to follow my path, I feel her beside me, watching, waiting, ready to welcome me when I finally decide to stay. The house has been empty for 30 years. But it won't be empty much longer. Soon, there will be two of us in the wood. And we'll wait together, in the grain, in the warmth, in the patient silence of the trees that became a home, for the next person who can feel, who can see, who can trace the frame and find us waiting. The house came with a letter. Not left for me specifically, but tucked into the frame of the front door, yellowed and brittle, addressed to whoever opens next. I found it my first day, before I even unlocked the door, before I stepped inside. The paper crumbled at the edges when I pulled it free, and the handwriting was faded, spidery, the ink browned with age. Asterisk if you're reading this, we are gone. Not dead, just gone. We left in a hurry, and we left things behind. The house will feel empty, but it's not. Pay attention to the handles. They remember. They remember all of us. Be gentle with them. They've been held so many times, by so many hands, and they miss the weight. Asterisk I read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it in my pocket. Then I unlocked the door and went inside. The house was small, a craftsman bungalow from the 20s, all dark wood and built-in cabinets and windows that rattled in their frames. It had been on the market for years, the realtor told me, ever since the last owners vanished. No one knew why. They just left one day, left everything, and never came back. The bank took it, tried to sell it, failed, tried again. I got it for a price that made my friends worry and my family assume I'd been scammed. I didn't care. I needed a place, and this place needed someone. It felt right from the moment I stepped through the door. The first thing I noticed was the door handles. Not the front door, but the interior ones. Bedrooms, bathroom, closets, cabinets. They were all brass, old brass, the kind that darkens with age and polishes with use. And they were all worn smooth. Not just polished, but worn, the brass actually thinned in places, the patterns on the hardware nearly erased by decades of hands gripping, turning, pulling. I ran my finger over one, the handle to the main bedroom. It was cool, smooth as glass, and for a moment I felt something under my fingertip. Not a vibration, not warmth. Just a presence, a faint echo of all the hands that had held it before me. I pulled my hand away quickly and told myself I was imagining things. Old houses feel like that sometimes. They have atmosphere. That's all. But I couldn't stop noticing them. Every handle in the house was the same. Worn smooth, worn thin, worn to a polish that no amount of cleaning could achieve, only the constant grip of human hands over decades. The kitchen cabinet handles were almost flat in the center, the brass worn away to a shallow depression that exactly fit the curve of fingers. The bathroom door handle had a thumb-shaped hollow on the latch side, where someone had pressed to open it 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times. I started wondering about the hands that had done the wearing. How many people had lived here? How many generations? How many mornings had someone gripped that bathroom handle, half asleep, stumbling toward coffee? How many children had learned to reach up and turn the bedroom knobs, their small hands leaving their own small marks on the brass? How many goodbyes had been said with a hand on the front door, a last grip before stepping out into the world? The letter had said they remember. I didn't believe it, not really. But I started touching them differently. Gently. Deliberately. As if they could feel it. The dream started the second week. In them, I was walking through the house at night, but the house was full of people. Not ghosts, just people, ordinary people going about ordinary lives. A woman in a bathrobe, shuffling to the bathroom in the dark, her hand finding the handle by memory. A man in work clothes, coming home late, gripping the front door handle with a tired sigh. Children running, their small palms slapping against cabinet doors, leaving prints on the brass that glowed faintly in the dreamlight. They didn't see me. I was invisible to them, a ghost in my own house. Watching the lives that had been lived here, the hands that had worn these handles smooth. I woke up with my own hand outstretched, reaching for something that wasn't there. I started sleeping with my bedroom door open. I told myself it was for air circulation, but really it was so I could see the hallway, so I could watch the bathroom door handle from my bed. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe the handle turning on its own. Maybe a ghostly hand gripping it in the dark. I watched every night, and nothing happened. The handle stayed still. The house stayed quiet. But the feeling grew, the certainty that I wasn't alone, that something was in the house with me, something that lived in the brass, something that remembered. One night, about a month in, I couldn't sleep. I got up at 3 in the morning and walked through the house, touching every handle. The front door, warm from the night air outside. The kitchen cabinets, cool and smooth. The bathroom, the thumb-shaped hollow fitting my thumb exactly. The bedroom doors, each one slightly different, worn by different hands, different lives. I stood in the hallway, my palm resting on the main bedroom handle, and I closed my eyes. And I felt them. Not saw them, felt them. Hands. Dozens of hands, hundreds, all gripping the same handle I was gripping, at different times, in different years, all leaving their imprint on the brass, all becoming part of its memory. I felt the woman in the bathrobe, her grip loose and sleepy. I felt the man coming home from work, his grip firm and tired. I felt a child, small fingers barely reaching, excited for a birthday morning. I felt an old woman, her grip thin and weak, holding on for balance. I felt all of them, layered over each other, compressed into the brass by time and pressure and the strange ability of metal to hold on to the touch of skin. I opened my eyes. The hallway was empty. But my hand was still on the handle, and the handle was warm now, warmer than it should have been, warmer than my palm could account for. I pulled away, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw the faint impression of my own grip join the others, a new layer on the old brass, another hand in the long history of hands that had held this handle. After that night, I couldn't stop touching them. I found excuses to open cabinets I didn't need to open, doors I didn't need to go through. I ran my fingers over the worn brass constantly, feeling for the echoes, the memories, the lives that had been pressed into the metal. I started to recognize individual grips. The woman in the bathrobe felt different from the man coming home from work. The children felt different from the old woman. They all had their own weight, their own pressure, their own duration. They all left their own marks, not just on the brass, but on me. I stopped going out. I stopped answering calls. I spent my days and nights in the house, moving from handle to handle, touching, feeling, remembering. The house had been empty for years, but it wasn't empty now. It was full of hands. Full of grips. Full of people who had lived here and left and never come back, but who had left something behind in the brass, something that would never wear away, something that would always remember being held. The letter had said they weren't dead, just gone. I understood now. They weren't dead because they were still here. In the handles. In the worn smooth places where their hands had rested. In the warmth that never quite faded, the presence that never quite left. They had gone, but they hadn't left. They had become part of the house, part of the metal, part of the memory that lived in every grip, every turn, every door that opened and closed a million times. Last night, I was sitting in the kitchen, running my thumb over the hollow in the cabinet handle, when I felt something new. A grip. Not one of the old ones, not the woman or the man or the children or the old woman. A new grip. Faint at first, then stronger. And I realized, with a cold that had nothing to do with temperature, that it was mine. My grip, from earlier, from the countless times I had touched this handle. I had joined them. I had become part of the memory. I was adding myself to the brass, layer by layer, grip by grip, until one day I would be as much a part of this house as any of them. I pulled my hand away and stared at the handle. It was warm. It was always warm now. And somewhere in the metal, my grip was settling in next to all the others, becoming part of the long history of hands that had held it, worn it, loved it. I don't know how long I'll stay here. Maybe years. Maybe forever. But I know that when I go, when I leave like all the others left, I won't really be gone. I'll be in the handles. In the worn smooth places. In the brass that remembers every grip, every hand, every life that passed through this house. And someday, someone else will come, someone who notices the handles, who touches them gently, who feels the echoes of all the hands that came before. And they'll add their grip to the collection, and the memory will grow, and the house will never be empty, not really, not as long as there are hands to hold the handles and brass warm enough to remember. I'm going to write a letter of my own. Tuck it into the door frame for whoever opens next. Tell them to pay attention to the handles. Tell them to be gentle. Tell them that the people who lived here aren't gone. They're just waiting, in the worn smooth places, for someone new to hold on. The step was old. That much I knew before I ever sat on it. The whole building was old, a walk-up in a neighborhood that had been poor for 100 years and was only now starting to attract the kind of people who used words like historic and character. I was not one of those people. I was just someone looking for a cheap apartment, and this was the cheapest I could find, on a street where the streetlights flickered and the garbage pickup was unpredictable and the neighbors kept to themselves in the way of people who had learned that keeping to themselves was the safest way to live. I signed the lease on a Tuesday. Moved my boxes in on a Wednesday. By Thursday evening, I was exhausted, surrounded by unpacked cardboard, and desperately in need of air. I stepped out the front door and sat on the top step, the one just before the sidewalk, the one that caught the last of the evening sun. I just wanted to sit for a few minutes, to breathe, to not think about the chaos waiting for me inside. The stone was warm. Not hot, just warm, the way old stone gets when it's been in the sun all day. I leaned back on my hands and closed my eyes and let the warmth seep into me. And then, without warning, the stone shifted. Not physically. It didn't move, didn't crack, didn't change position. But something beneath me shifted. A presence. A weight that wasn't my weight. I felt it press up against me, not pushing, just settling. As if the stone was adjusting to accommodate me, the way a cushion might when you sit on it, except stone doesn't do that. Stone doesn't move. I opened my eyes and looked down. The step was just stone. Gray, worn smooth in the center by decades of feet, chipped at the edges, stained in places by things I didn't want to identify. Nothing had changed. But the feeling didn't go away. Something was under me, around me, in the stone itself. Something that knew I was there. I stood up quickly and went back inside. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself old buildings settle, make noises, create sensations that have perfectly ordinary explanations. I told myself a lot of things that night, lying in my sleeping bag on the floor, listening to the building breathe around me. The next evening, I went out again. Same time, same step. I sat down carefully, waiting for the feeling to return. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just stone, warm from the sun, solid under me. I started to relax, started to laugh at myself for being so jumpy. Then the stone remembered me. That's the only way I can describe it. It remembered that I had sat there before. The presence returned, but stronger this time, more familiar. It pressed up against me, and with it came something else. An image, faint but clear. A woman, young, her knees drawn up to her chin, sitting on this same step, staring at the street. She was waiting for someone. I could feel her hope, her anxiety, the way she checked the corner every few seconds, the way her fingers tapped against her knee in a nervous rhythm. She sat here for hours, night after night, waiting for someone who never came. The image faded. I was alone on the step, my heart pounding. But I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that the woman had been real. She had sat here, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 100, and the stone had remembered. The stone held her weight, her waiting, her hope, and it had given it to me. I started sitting on the step every evening. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I needed to know what else the stone remembered. And every evening, it gave me more. An old man, tired after a long day's work, resting here before climbing the stairs to his apartment. He sat heavily, his bones aching, his breath short. He stayed for exactly 5 minutes, then hauled himself up and went inside. He did this every day for years, until one day he didn't come back. A child, small, maybe 5 years old, sitting here with a toy truck, running it along the edge of the step while she waited for her mother to come home from work. The truck made a specific sound against the stone, a grinding rumble that I could almost hear, almost feel, in the memory the stone gave me. 2 teenagers, late at night, sitting close together, their shoulders touching. They whispered things I couldn't hear, but I felt their nervousness, their excitement, the way their hands found each other in the dark. They sat here for hours, until the streetlights flickered off and on, signaling the approach of dawn. A woman in her 30s, crying. She sat here alone, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs I couldn't hear but could feel in the weight of her grief. She sat for a long time, and then she stood up, wiped her face, and went inside. She never sat here again. Each evening brought a new memory, a new life, a new weight pressed into the stone. I started to recognize them, to anticipate them. The old man came on Tuesdays. The child came on Thursdays. The teenagers came on Saturdays, always late, always nervous, always full of a hope that made my chest ache. The crying woman came only once, but her weight was the heaviest of all, and I felt it every time I sat down, a sadness so deep it had become part of the stone itself. I stopped unpacking my apartment. The boxes sat where I had left them, gathering dust. I spent all my time on the step, waiting for the memories, receiving them, holding them. I started to feel like I was becoming part of the stone myself, that my own weight was being added to the accumulation, that someday, someone else would sit here and feel me, feel my loneliness, my obsession, my gradual withdrawal from the world of the living. The neighbors noticed. The woman from the first floor, the one who never spoke, started giving me looks when she passed. The man from the third floor, the one who came home late and left early, paused once as he walked by, as if he wanted to say something, then thought better of it and kept walking. They knew something was wrong with me. They just didn't know what. One evening, about 2 months in, an old woman sat down next to me. I hadn't seen her approach. She was just suddenly there, lowering herself carefully onto the step, her bones creaking, her breath a soft whistle. She was ancient, 80 at least, maybe 90, with skin like parchment and eyes that had gone milky with age. "You feel them, don't you?" she said. Her voice was thin, reedy, but clear. "The ones who sat here before." I stared at her. I couldn't speak. She nodded slowly. "I used to, when I was young. This step remembers everything. Everyone who ever sat here, everyone who ever waited here, everyone who ever rested here. It holds them all." She reached out and placed her hand on the stone, a gesture of greeting, of recognition. "I sat here as a girl, waiting for my mother to come home. I sat here as a young woman, waiting for a boy who never showed up. I sat here as a mother, with my own children, watching them play on the sidewalk." She smiled, a thin, sad smile. "The step remembers all of it. It remembers me. I found my voice." "How do you know? How do you know it remembers?" She turned those milky eyes toward me. "Because I came back. After 60 years, I came back. And when I sat down, I felt myself. The girl I was, the young woman, the mother. They were all still here, in the stone, waiting for me to come back and sit with them." She patted my hand with fingers that felt like dry twigs. "You'll feel it too, someday. When you're old, when you've lived a long life, you'll come back here and sit on this step, and you'll feel all the versions of yourself that sat here before. You'll feel the weight of your own life, pressed into the stone, waiting for you to return." She sat with me for a long time, not speaking, just being there. When she finally left, hauling herself up with an effort that made my heart hurt, she paused and looked back at me. "Be careful," she said. "The step will take as much as you give it. It will hold your weight, your waiting, your loneliness, forever. Make sure you're giving it something worth holding on to." She walked away, slow and steady, and disappeared around the corner. I sat on the step for a long time after she left, thinking about what she had said. About the weights I was adding to the stone. About what the step would remember of me. I started sitting differently after that. Not just receiving the memories, but contributing to them. I sat with intention. I sat with hope. I sat with the kind of weight I wanted the stone to hold forever. I thought about the old man, the child, the teenagers, the crying woman. I thought about all the lives that had passed through this step, all the weights that had been pressed into it. And I tried to add something worthy to the collection. I'm still here. Still sitting on the step every evening, feeling the memories, adding my own. The boxes in my apartment remain unpacked. I don't care about them anymore. This step is my home now, my connection to everyone who came before, my contribution to everyone who will come after. Last night, I felt something new. A weight that wasn't one of the old ones. A presence that felt familiar and strange at the same time. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was me. Not the me of now, but the me of 2 months ago, the me who first sat on this step, exhausted and lonely and full of a sadness I hadn't yet learned to name. That me was in the stone now, added to the accumulation, waiting for the future me to come back and sit with her. I sat with her for a long time, the me of now and the me of then, sharing the step, sharing the weight, sharing the strange communion of stone that remembers everything. When I finally stood up and went inside, I felt lighter. Not because I had left something behind, but because I had found it. A part of myself I hadn't known was missing, pressed into the stone, waiting for me to come back and claim it. The step is still there. It will always be there. It will hold the weight of everyone who ever sat on it, forever. And someday, when I'm old, when I've lived a long life, I'll come back. I'll sit on this step, and I'll feel all the versions of myself that sat here before. The girl I was, the woman I became, the old woman I'll be. They'll all be here, in the stone, waiting for me to return. And the step will remember. It always remembers.
Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.